The night was quiet, yet it carried a weight that Sandra Bullock could not ignore. She had spent her whole life under bright lights, surrounded by people who saw her as strong, confident, and untouchable. But behind those walls of applause, she often felt the tremor of fear that comes with fame, the kind of fear that whispers late at night when no one is watching. In those moments, safety did not come from locks on doors or cameras on gates. It came from the presence of someone who understood, someone who carried a calmness like a shield. That someone was Keanu Reeves. Their bond had formed years ago on a film set, but what surprised Sandra was not the charm of his presence or the way fans spoke about him. It was his silence, his deep patience, and the way he respected her space without ever needing to prove himself. She once said to herself, "I feel safe when he is near." She could not explain it then, but with time, she began to see the layers behind that feeling. The first time she truly noticed it was during a late evening in a crowded studio. Exhaustion filled the air. People rushed around, voices clashed, equipment crashed against the floor. Sandra felt her chest tighten. The noise felt too much. Her heart raced and her mind screamed for escape. Then she turned, and there was Keanu standing at a distance, calm as still water. He did not tell her to breathe. He did not flood her with advice. He simply lowered his eyes, gave a small nod, and let his quiet presence anchor her back into herself. Later, as the crew cleared, she asked him, "How do you stay so calm when everything is falling apart around you?" Keanu gave a half smile, almost shy, and replied, "Chaos only wins if you let it inside you." Those words stayed with her, echoing years later when life threw heavier storms her way. People saw them on screen and imagined romance, but the truth was deeper and more fragile than that. What Sandra found in Keanu was not a love story for magazines. It was the kind of trust that can hold a broken soul steady. He had lived through his own shadows, his own pain, and he carried those scars not as shame but as quiet strength. Experts often say that people feel safe when someone reflects stability, humility, and patience. Sandra's life had been filled with fast-moving energy, but Keanu was the opposite. He slowed the world down. He made silence feel like a gift. She once told a close friend, "He doesn't have to say anything. I just know I'm safe when he's around." But safety is never simple. It gets tested. One evening, after a long press event, Sandra found herself surrounded by strangers pushing too close, asking too many questions, reaching for her arm. Her body tensed, her breath shortened. Before panic could take her, Keanu stepped forward. He did not shout, he did not push. He simply placed himself gently between her and the crowd, his presence firm yet kind. People backed away, not out of fear, but because his quiet strength demanded respect. Sandra's shoulders relaxed as she followed him out, her heart steadying with each step. In the car ride later, she whispered, "Thank you." Keanu just shook his head and said, "You don't need to thank me. Everyone deserves to feel safe." The words hit her deeper than she expected. It was not about her being a star. It was about her being human. What made Sandra's trust in Keanu so unshakable was not grand gestures, but small moments that revealed his character. He never interrupted her when she needed to speak. He never mocked her fears, and he never made her feel weak for being vulnerable. Instead, he listened. He stayed, and he reminded her through his actions that kindness is not weakness. It is strength. Experts call it the psychology of trust. When a person consistently shows respect without judgment, the brain begins to release calm instead of fear. Sandra felt that every time Keanu was near, his presence told her, "You are not alone, you are not being judged, and you are not unsafe." But what neither of them expected was how this bond would be tested by the challenges that lay ahead. Fame, grief, loneliness, and pressure would come like waves, sometimes stronger than anyone could imagine. Sandra would find herself standing at crossroads, unsure if she could keep going. And in those moments, it would be Keanu's quiet resilience that pulled her through. This story is not about a glamorous life. It is about the hidden reason why Sandra Bullock feels safe with Keanu Reeves, a reason built not on spotlight but on shadows, not on applause but on silence. It is about how two people, scarred yet kind, found in each other a reminder that safety is not the absence of fear, but the presence of respect and trust. And this was only the beginning. Days turned into weeks. and weeks turned into years. Yet Sandra never forgot how steady Keanu's presence felt. On sets, in quiet rooms, or even in passing conversations, there was always that same sense of ease. She once said quietly to herself, "He carries storms inside him, yet he never lets the rain fall on others." Still, the world outside was not always kind. Sandra had faced painful losses in her personal life, moments that left her feeling as if the ground beneath her was breaking apart. She remembered one evening when she sat alone in her home, lights dimmed, silence pressing heavy against her chest. Her phone buzzed with messages from people offering sympathy, but none of them reached her heart. She felt numb, as if no one could understand. Then, without warning, she received a simple text from Keanu. It read, "I am here if you need quiet company." There was no demand, no pressure, just an open space offered with respect. She invited him over, unsure what she even wanted. When he arrived, he did not bring flowers. He did not bring long speeches. Instead, he sat beside her on the couch, not too close, not too far, and together they stared at the flickering shadows on the wall. For hours, they did not speak, and yet in that silence, Sandra felt something stronger than words. She felt safe again. The experts who studied human bonds often say that real trust is built not by what people do when everything is easy, but by how they behave when everything is broken. Keanu never rushed to fix her pain. He respected it. And in that respect, she found strength. But life, with its unpredictability, soon gave them a test neither had expected. One winter evening, after an event in New York, the two of them stepped out of a crowded hall. Flashes from cameras blinded their eyes, voices from reporters drowned their thoughts, and strangers pressed closer with desperate curiosity. Sandra's breath hitched as the crowd surged, her body remembering all the fears of being trapped. She looked for escape, but the walls of people only grew tighter. Keanu's hand reached out, steady and firm, guiding her gently but surely through the chaos. He whispered only once, "Follow my steps." She did. And though the shouting continued, though the flashing lights burned, she realized her fear had eased. His calm, almost unshakable rhythm gave her body something to trust. Within minutes, they slipped into a quiet side street where the noise fell away. Sandra leaned against the wall, trembling, and whispered, "I can't keep living like this." Keanu looked at her with his usual quiet eyes. "The world may not change," he said softly, "but you can still find places of peace." His words lingered, and for days after, she thought about them. What did it mean to find peace when the world refused to slow down? She began to notice how Keanu carried peace inside himself, not because life was easy, but because he refused to let it consume him. Still, Sandra's doubts grew. She feared that her trust in him was fragile, that maybe she was leaning too much on someone who had his own battles. One late night, she asked him directly, "Don't you ever get tired of being the calm one? Don't you ever feel the weight?" Keanu smiled faintly, but there was sadness in his eyes. "Of course I do. But safety isn't about being strong all the time. It's about showing up, even when it hurts." That confession shook her. It made her realize that what she admired about him was not the absence of pain, but the courage to keep showing kindness despite it. Then came the unexpected twist. Rumors began to spread in the media. Headlines painted stories of romance, of secrets, of unspoken love between Sandra and Keanu. Some called it beautiful, others mocked it, twisting it into gossip. Sandra felt her stomach churn as she read those words. She feared that what was pure and steady between them would be poisoned by the world outside. One morning, she sat across from Keanu, holding a magazine that screamed lies across its cover. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice breaking. "They don't know what this really is. They'll destroy it." Keanu leaned back, his face unreadable. Then he said something she would never forget. "They can only destroy what you let them define. What we have is not theirs to shape." The strength in his words gave her clarity, yet it also brought a new question to her heart. Was she strong enough to protect this bond from the noise of the world? Could she hold on to the trust and safety she felt without letting fear twist it? As the months went on, challenges multiplied. Sometimes they went weeks without speaking, both lost in their careers and private battles. But somehow, whenever life pulled them apart, something always pulled them back together. Sometimes it was a small text, sometimes it was a sudden meeting on set, sometimes it was nothing more than silence shared under the same sky. And as Sandra looked at the path ahead, she realized that the safety she felt with Keanu was not a shield against the world. It was a fire within it, a fragile fire that needed protection, honesty, and patience. But even as she clung to that fire, she could sense that darker storms were on their way, storms that would not just test her, but test the bond itself in ways she never imagined. Spring arrived with soft winds and bright skies, but Sandra felt no calm inside her heart. The months had been heavy with whispers from the outside world. The gossip grew louder, the cameras sharper, and the questions more personal. Strangers she had never met spoke about her as if they owned her story. Every time she stepped out, she felt eyes watching, waiting to pull her life into pieces. She had always been strong, but strength has limits. One evening, after another exhausting day, she sat by her window staring at the city lights. The glow of the streets should have felt alive, but to her it felt like fire pressing against glass. She whispered to herself, "I can't breathe in this life anymore." Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Keanu. "Do you want to take a quiet walk?" She hesitated, unsure if she had the energy, but something inside her said yes. Minutes later, they were walking along an almost empty street, the night cool and gentle. No cameras, no noise, just the sound of their steps on the pavement. For a while, they said nothing. Then Sandra broke the silence. "Sometimes I wonder if people will ever stop pulling at me. I feel like I've lost myself." Keanu walked slowly, his hands in his pockets. "They see what they want to see," he said softly. "But you are still you. Don't let their noise decide your worth." His words soothed her, but deep down, a darker fear began to grow. What if this bond, the only safe place she had, was pulled into the same fire? What if Keanu, with all his patience, finally grew tired of holding space for her? That fear became sharper when a headline struck harder than the rest. A magazine wrote a cruel piece claiming that Keanu was the protector Sandra leans on because she is too weak to stand alone. The words burned in her chest. She had fought for her career, for her dignity, for her family. To see herself painted as helpless shattered her pride. She called Keanu that night, her voice shaking. "They make it sound like I'm nothing without you. Like I'm just some broken person you carry." Keanu listened quietly, then answered. "They don't know you. I do. And I know you are not weak." But Sandra could not let the words go. Anger and shame mixed inside her. "Don't you see, Keanu? They've turned me into a shadow standing behind you. They make it look like I can't survive on my own." For the first time, his silence was heavy. He paused, then said carefully, "Is that what you believe too?" The question cut her deeper than she expected. She realized she did not know how to answer. For days after, she avoided him. She buried herself in work, surrounded by scripts and schedules, pretending she was fine. But at night, when the house grew silent, she thought of his words. "Is that what you believe too?" The truth scared her. Part of her feared that maybe she had leaned too much on him, that maybe she had lost part of her own strength. But another part of her knew that he had given her safety she had never found anywhere else. One afternoon, as she rehearsed for a new role, her emotions cracked. She found herself crying in the middle of a quiet dressing room. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman who looked strong to the world, but felt fragile inside. The door opened slowly, and there was Keanu. He had come quietly, no announcement, no noise. He stood at the doorway, his eyes gentle but steady. Sandra wiped her tears quickly, embarrassed. "You shouldn't be here," she said. He stepped inside, calm as always. "I know you don't want to be seen this way, but you don't have to hide it from me." Her voice broke. "I don't want to be a burden to you," he shook his head. "You're not a burden. You're human, and humans need each other." Those words should have comforted her, but instead, they brought another wave of fear. If she needed him this much, what would happen if one day he was gone? What would happen if his own battles pulled him away? That night, she could not sleep. Shadows filled her mind, memories of loss resurfaced, and the fear of losing safety itself grew heavier than the fear of the world outside. The bond that once felt unshakable now stood at the edge of doubt. She trusted him more than anyone, yet she feared what her heart might do if that trust ever broke. And what neither of them knew was that a storm far greater than gossip was already on its way, one that would test not only their bond, but their very sense of who they were. The storm did not arrive with thunder. It arrived quietly, through a single phone call that changed everything. Sandra was sitting in her kitchen sipping tea when her phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it, but something inside her told her to answer. The voice on the other end was gentle, yet carried heavy news. A close friend of hers, someone she had known since her early years, had passed away suddenly. The words sank into her heart like stones falling into water. She felt her throat close, her hands tremble. Memories of laughter, old conversations, and promises never kept rushed back in a flood. She pressed the phone against her chest after the call ended and whispered, "Not again. I can't go through this again." Grief had always been Sandra's deepest fear, because it reminded her of everything she had already lost. It reminded her of empty spaces at tables, of voices gone too soon, of the cruel way life takes without warning. That evening, Keanu arrived after hearing the news. He stepped inside quietly, carrying no flowers, no formal words. He knew grief could not be fixed. He sat beside her, offering his silence, letting her cry without shame. But this time was different. This time her grief turned into anger. Between sobs, she looked at him and said, "You don't understand. You've learned how to live with loss. I haven't. I don't know how you do it. I feel like the world is punishing me." Keanu's face was calm, but there was pain in his eyes. "I do understand," he said softly. "I have carried more loss than I can count, but I don't let it take away the love that still exists." His words were meant to comfort, but instead they struck her like fire. She pulled back, shaking her head. "That's easy for you to say. You've made peace with it. I can't. I feel weak. I feel broken, and I hate that you always seem so calm when I'm falling apart." The room grew tense, the silence sharp. Keanu lowered his eyes. For the first time, Sandra saw him hesitate, as if her words had reached the cracks he never showed. He spoke slowly, almost whispering. "You think I'm calm because I'm strong. But sometimes I'm calm because I have no strength left to fight." Those words stunned her. She had never heard him admit weakness, never seen him peel back the quiet armor he wore. Suddenly, guilt washed over her. She realized she had thrown her pain at him, forgetting that he carried his own shadows. But the damage lingered. For days after, their conversations grew shorter, their meetings less frequent. The safety she once felt seemed to slip through her fingers. One night, Sandra called him, her voice trembling. "Are we drifting apart?" Keanu took a long pause before answering. "No, but sometimes safety means space. We both need space to face our own storms." His words were kind, but they carried distance. For the first time in years, she felt the bond was fragile, like a glass thread ready to break. The media noticed, too. Headlines began to shift. Gossip spoke of distance between them, of silence where once there was closeness. Sandra hated the lies, but what hurt more was the possibility that some of them might be true. One evening, she stood at her balcony, staring at the dark horizon. She whispered, "What if the world was right? What if I've leaned too much on him? What if I lose him?" Yet even as fear pressed against her chest, another truth glimmered beneath it. She remembered the way he once said, "Safety isn't about being strong all the time. It's about showing up even when it hurts." But would he still show up? Would she? As spring turned into summer, Sandra knew the real test had only begun. Their bond had carried them through whispers, through grief, through storms of the past. But now it stood in the eye of a new storm, one that demanded not just trust, but honesty. For the first time, Sandra wondered if feeling safe was enough, or if they would need something deeper to survive what was coming next. The summer heat carried with it a tension that Sandra could not shake. Her life had always been under the public eye, but this time it felt unbearable. The distance between her and Keanu was not only felt in private, it was being watched, dissected, and twisted by the world. It began with a single leaked video. A bystander had filmed a private moment weeks earlier when Sandra and Keanu had walked together after an event. In the short clip, Sandra's face was wet with tears, and Keanu's quiet voice could be faintly heard saying, "Sometimes safety means space." Within hours of the leak, the clip spread everywhere. Headlines exploded with speculation. Some called it a breakup. Others called it weakness. Some even mocked Sandra, saying she was too dependent, too fragile. The comments cut deeper than knives. Sandra avoided the internet, but friends sent her screenshots, articles, and cruel words she could not escape. She sat alone one evening, the glow of her phone lighting her face, scrolling through strangers' opinions about her life. Each word felt like a weight pressing harder against her chest. When Keanu arrived the next day, she confronted him, anger rising in her voice. "Do you see what they're saying about me? Do you see what they've turned us into?" He looked at her quietly, his eyes tired. "I see it. But we can't live our lives by their voices." "Easy for you to say," she snapped, her voice trembling. "They call me weak. They make it look like I can't survive without you. I've worked my whole life to stand strong, and now all people see is me crying in the street while you play the calm savior." The pain in her words hung heavy in the room. Keanu did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but softer than usual. "I never wanted to be your savior. I only wanted to be your friend." Sandra's throat tightened. His words struck something inside her. Fear, love, shame, all tangled together. "Then why does it feel like I'm drowning in this bond? Why does it feel like the world has turned my safety into weakness?" Keanu's silence was different this time. Not the silence of comfort, but the silence of distance. She could see it in his eyes, the way he carried not just her pain, but his own exhaustion. That night, he left earlier than usual. Sandra stood at the window, watching his figure disappear into the city lights. She whispered to herself, "Am I losing him?" The storm outside only grew. Talk shows picked up the story. Interviews asked her about Keanu, twisting questions into traps. Her publicist advised her to remain silent, but silence only fed the fire. Then came the breaking point. She was invited to a charity gala, an event she could not refuse. When she walked onto the red carpet, the cameras flashed brighter than ever. Questions rained down. "Is Keanu still in your life? Are you too dependent on him? Is your friendship falling apart?" Before she could answer, a voice came from behind. It was Keanu. He had arrived quietly, as he always did, dressed simply, his face calm. The crowd roared louder, flashing lights like lightning. He walked to her side, and for a moment the world froze. Sandra felt her heart pound in her chest. Keanu looked at the reporters and said in his steady voice, "Sometimes people confuse kindness for weakness, but kindness is the greatest strength I know. And Sandra is stronger than anyone will ever understand." His words silenced the chaos for a moment, but inside Sandra, the storm grew sharper. She should have felt grateful. She should have felt safe again. But instead, she felt exposed, as if her deepest fears had been laid bare before the entire world. That night, after the gala, she told him quietly, "Thank you, but I don't know if I can keep living under this weight. I don't know if I can keep being the woman who needs saving." Keanu's face was unreadable. "Then don't be. Be the woman who saves herself. I'll still be here, but the strength has to come from you." Her breath caught. It was the truth she had been avoiding. She wanted his presence, but she also wanted to prove, to herself, to the world, that she was not defined by needing someone else. The bond that once felt unshakable now stood on fragile ground. She trusted him, but she feared losing herself. And as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, she realized the hardest question was no longer, "Do I trust him?" It was, "Do I trust myself?" The answer would decide not just the future of their bond, but the future of who she was becoming. The days after the gala felt heavier than Sandra expected. She thought Keanu's words would silence the voices outside, but instead they stirred new questions inside her. She could not escape the thought that the world saw her through the shadow of his calm strength. While she longed to be seen for her own resilience, she tried to drown the noise in work, taking on long hours, pushing herself into rehearsals and interviews. But even in those busy rooms, her mind replayed the moment on the red carpet when Keanu had defended her. His words had been kind, but they had also painted her once more as someone fragile, someone in need of protection. One night, after a long shoot, she returned home and sat in the dark. The city outside was alive with light, but inside her home felt hollow. She whispered to herself, "Who am I without him? Who do I become if I'm always standing in his shadow?" The question lingered until it broke her. She reached for her phone and called Keanu. When he answered, she didn't wait. Her voice shook as she said, "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep being the person the world calls weak. I can't keep leaning on you every time I fall apart." There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Keanu said quietly, "Then maybe you shouldn't." Her heart sank. "What do you mean?" His voice was steady, but it carried pain. "Sandra, I've always wanted you to feel safe with me, but safety doesn't mean you should lose yourself. If this bond is making you doubt your own strength, maybe stepping back is what you need." His words shattered her. Tears burned her eyes as she whispered, "So you're leaving?" "No," he said softly. "I'll never leave. But maybe for now, I need to stand a little further away so you can see your own strength more clearly." When the call ended, Sandra dropped the phone to the floor and covered her face with her hands. It felt like the very ground beneath her had been pulled away. For years, his quiet presence had been her anchor, and now he was asking her to sail alone into waters she feared. The days that followed were some of the hardest she had known. She walked through her routines, met people, smiled for cameras, but inside she was crumbling. At night, when the world went silent, she cried into her pillow, whispering his name, longing for his calm voice. But something began to change. Slowly, painfully, she started to notice small sparks of strength within herself. She found herself making choices without waiting for his guidance. She stood in interviews with steadier eyes, spoke her truth without fear of being broken. It was not easy. Every step felt like walking through fire, but with each day, she realized she was still standing. Still, the ache for him never faded. She missed the way he listened, the way his silence carried comfort, the way his presence made the world feel less cruel. Then came the breaking point. One evening, she was invited to speak at a charity event. The hall was filled with hundreds of people, and as she stood at the podium, she felt her voice shake. The memory of the leaked video, the cruel headlines, the whispers of weakness, all of it pressed against her chest. Her hands trembled, and for a moment she thought she would collapse. Then, at the corner of the room, she saw him. Keanu stood quietly, away from the crowd, not drawing attention, just watching. Their eyes met for a second, and in that second, something inside her shifted. He was not stepping forward to shield her this time. He was simply there, trusting her to stand. She took a deep breath. Her voice steadied. She began to speak about strength, about loss, about kindness being the true measure of resilience. The crowd grew silent, listening not to a fragile woman, but to someone who carried her scars with dignity. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. After the event, she found him outside, leaning against a wall in the cool night air. She walked up to him, her eyes filled with both pain and gratitude. "You didn't step in," she whispered. Keanu looked at her, a faint smile in his eyes. "You didn't need me to. You saved yourself." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not from weakness. They were from a strength she had finally seen within herself. Yet beneath that strength, the bond between them still pulsed, fragile but alive. She realized then that safety with him was never about hiding in his shadow. It was about having someone who believed she could stand in the light. But even in that moment of clarity, a shadow lingered. She knew their journey was not over. Deeper storms still waited. Storms that would not just test their bond, but shake their lives in ways neither could predict. The weeks after the charity event brought a fragile peace into Sandra's life. She felt stronger, steadier, as if she had finally stepped into her own light. But the fear of losing Keanu still lingered in the corners of her heart. She often asked herself in silence, was this new strength the beginning of freedom or the beginning of distance? Their bond had changed. They spoke less often, but when they did, the conversations carried more depth. Every word felt heavier. Every silence carried more meaning. She sensed that Keanu was giving her space, allowing her to walk on her own path, yet she also knew he was never far away. He was like a steady flame in the distance, warm, constant, but no longer something she leaned on every moment. Then came the final storm. A sudden tragedy struck the film industry, one that shook everyone they knew. An accident on a set claimed the lives of two young actors, both of whom had been close to Sandra. The news spread like fire, and once again grief wrapped its cold hands around her. This time, though, it was not private. It was public, messy, and relentless. Reporters pushed her for statements. Fans flooded her with questions, and the images of loss filled every screen she looked at. Alone in her home, she broke down. She fell to the floor, her tears soaking into the carpet. Her body shook as she whispered, "Not again. I can't lose more people. I can't carry this anymore." And in that darkest hour, Keanu arrived. He didn't knock loudly. He didn't call ahead. He simply walked in, as if he had known she needed him without being told. When she saw him standing there, she collapsed into his arms. For a long time, they said nothing. He held her as her sobs filled the quiet room. But then something shifted. This time, instead of letting herself stay in his arms, she pulled back. She wiped her tears and stood on her own feet. Her voice trembled, but it carried strength. "I can't keep living in fear of loss. I can't keep breaking every time the world takes something away. I have to learn how to stand, even when it hurts." Keanu looked at her, his eyes reflecting both pain and pride. "You already are," he said gently. "Look at you, you're standing now." Her tears flowed again, but this time they were not only grief. They were release. She realized in that moment that safety with Keanu had never meant hiding behind him. It had meant learning, slowly and painfully, that she could face storms with her own strength. His presence had been the steady ground she needed to find her own footing. Days later, when she stood before cameras to speak about the tragedy, the world saw a different Sandra. Her voice was steady, her words filled with compassion, and her eyes carried both sorrow and resilience. She spoke not as someone fragile, but as someone who had been tested by storms and still stood tall. The audience was silent, deeply moved. Afterwards, in a quiet hallway, she found Keanu waiting. He gave her a small nod, almost shy, as if to say, "You did it." She walked to him, her heart heavy yet light at the same time. "I used to think I only felt safe because of you," she whispered. "But now I know I feel safe because you reminded me to trust myself." Keanu smiled faintly, his eyes soft. That was always the hidden reason. Safety isn't something someone gives you. It's something they help you find inside yourself. For the first time in a long time, Sandra felt free. Not free from grief, not free from pain, but free from the fear that she could not survive without someone holding her up. She realized that Keanu's true gift was not carrying her. It was showing her she could carry herself. Their bond did not fade. It grew stronger, deeper, unshakable. Not because she needed him to protect her, but because they now walked side by side. Two souls scarred by life but strengthened by trust. And as they stepped out into the evening light, Sandra felt something she had not felt in years. She felt peace.